The Prime Minister, flying off to a common market summit, calls for a full report on the claim that a former chief of MI5 may have been a Soviet spy. Mrs. Thatcher is expected to make a common statement on Thursday. The allegations, contained in today's Daily Mail and written by Chapman Pincher, allege that the man who headed MI5 between 1956 and 1965, Sir Roger Hollis, was suspected of being a KGB agent and was called back from retirement to face prolonged interrogation. Sir Roger, the son of a bishop, was twice married and died in 1973. Who's Who of that year carries no details of his career except attached to the Ministry of Defence, retired. Our political correspondent says MPs are hoping Mrs. Thatcher will make as full a statement as she did over Anthony Blunt. One Conservative MP, Mr. David Trippier, wants a full inquiry into the working of MI5 and MI6 since the last war. He was asked if he was worried about public confidence in the security services.
Quite convinced that the vast majority of the people in this country feel that the confidence in the British security system is at an all-time low. We now find that we keep getting these shock horror stories which keep being leaked to the press. No one knows anything about them. I don't as a Member of Parliament, and I think it's about time we brought them out into the open.
But why do you think it is that these allegations have taken so long to come out into the open?
Well, I don't know why they've taken so long, but I think that is the most worrying aspect of them. I mean, there obviously is quite a cover-up going on within the security system, and I think that that's the sort of thing that an inquiry would actually bring to the surface.
In the Netherlands, the two-day Common Market Summit has opened at Maastricht, and Mrs. Thatcher is taking a tough line on fishing policy, which has led to some stern talking from the other heads of state. John Humphreys watched the opening ceremonies.
Chancellor Schmidt of Germany arrived to the tune of Happy Days, which seemed a bit inappropriate since he's reported to be most unhappy with the failure of the EEC to agree on the new fishing deal. For that, the Germans blame Britain, and Mrs. Thatcher doesn't think that's fair. The British say they'd already made many concessions in the belief that an overall agreement was about to be concluded at the end of last year. The fact that it wasn't is, they say, the fault of the French. And there's a strong suspicion that President Giscard, who's in the middle of an election campaign at home, is using the issue to win votes. Quarrelling with the French is nothing new for us, but there is concern at the prospect of both France and Germany ranged against Britain on an issue which attracts such strong emotions. There's been a hint that the Germans might hold up the budget repayments, for which Britain fought so hard, and the French would probably go along with them.
Government vets called to examine cattle at two farms in East Kent have cleared them of suspected foot-and-mouth disease, and so far the outbreak on a farm near Yarmouth in the Isle of Wight hasn't spread to the mainland. But stringent precautions are still being taken in a large area of Hampshire and Dorset. The main danger appears to be from 16 animals from a farm near the infected one, which were at Shaftesbury Market in Dorset. They've now all been traced to their new owners, and so far have shown no signs of the disease. But symptoms take 14 days to appear, and it still can't be completely ruled out. In Chile, a fire in one of the tallest buildings of the capital, Santiago, may have been the work of terrorists. 11 people died when fire broke out on the 12th floor of the 35-story building. Another 25 people were injured. Suspicions that leftist terrorists were responsible arose because the company which owns the building has close links with the Pinochet regime. At least 3 of those who died were suffocated inside the building, and 3 others died from their injuries after leaping from the building. BL are to write to the 48,000 owners of mini-metros to arrange for a modification to be carried out to the steering. The work is to avoid any chance of the steering locking up. The Department of Transport say that there's no need for concern if the metro is driven normally, but problems could arise if heavy pressure is applied to the rubber seal under the clutch pedal. This, says the department, could cause stiffness in the steering. BL says that a minor modification to overcome this problem has already been introduced in production. The former world motorcycle champion Mike Halewood has died in hospital in Birmingham. He'd been admitted on Saturday evening after his car was in collision with a lorry. Halewood suffered head injuries, and his 9-year-old daughter was killed in the accident. His 6-year-old son escaped with minor injuries. Halewood, known as Mike the Bike when he dominated motorcycle racing in the 60s, won 14 TTs in the Isle of Man and 10 world championships. He retired in favor of racing on 4 wheels, but returned to the Isle of Man 11 years later to win yet again at the age of 38. An immensely popular man, he was also courageous. He was awarded the George Medal for his rescue of a fellow driver, Clay Regazzoni, from a burning car in the 1973 South African Grand Prix. He retired 2 years ago, living with his wife and 2 children just outside Birmingham, where he ran a motorcycle business. He was happy to be away from racing, saying he'd got it out of his system. Among the first tributes was one from the sports minister, Hector Munro. Britain had lost one of its very best and most courageous sportsmen. His achievements were legendary. The Home Office has decided to set up 2 more army-style detention centres for young offenders. Tougher discipline, described by the Home Secretary as short, sharp shock treatment, has been in force at 2 centres for almost a year now. Today, the Home Office said Foston Hall near Derby and Hasler near Gosport will be introducing tougher regimes. Gavin Hewitt reports from one of the original centres at Send in Surrey.
Life at the detention centre is stricter, harsher, more military in flavour. For these lads aged between 14 and 17, there is an hour and 10 minutes of drill, parades and inspections each day.
Entries left! Turn!
It's the intention that their lives be fully occupied. Nearly 70% of them have been convicted of robbery. The emphasis is on discipline, manners and respect for authority. Every move involving a prison officer is punctuated by Sir. Physical education has been increased to an average of an hour and 20 minutes a day. After a year, there are no figures to gauge whether the experiment is working, but the government is prepared to view it favourably.
I was very impressed by the way, for example, that these lads are putting their backs into their drill and are trying hard. You can't make somebody drill well unless he's trying to do so. They were drilling very well, and they were obviously trying, and I think that that in itself is evidence of some degree of success.
Although the regime is strict, it's not brutal. There were no traces of resentment or sullenness. The boys did not appear cowed by authority. But the verdict must as yet remain uncertain.
Now the main points of the news again, with subtitles for the hard of hearing. The Prime Minister has called for a full report on the suggestion that Sir Roger Hollis, a former head of MI5, may have been a Soviet agent. In today's Daily Mail, Chapman Pincher wrote that Sir Roger was recalled from retirement to face prolonged interrogation about his 30 years in British intelligence. Sir Roger, who headed MI5 from 1956 to 1965, died 8 years ago. It said he didn't crack when interrogated. Meanwhile, a Conservative MP, Mr. David Trippier, is to ask the Prime Minister to hold a full inquiry into the conduct of MI5 and MI6 since the war. Officials investigating 2 possible cases of foot and mouth disease in Kent say tests on both of them have proved negative. Precautions have been tightened on many farms in the south of England to stop the disease spreading to the mainland from the Isle of Wight. In France, the outbreak of foot and mouth, which began in Brittany, has now spread along the coast to Normandy. BL are to write to the 48,000 owners of mini-metros to arrange for a minor modification to be carried out to the steering. The Department of Transport say there's no need for concern about the steering if the metro is driven normally. The former world motorcycle champion Mike Hailwood has died in hospital in Birmingham after his car was involved in a crash last Saturday. Hailwood, known as Mike the Bike when he dominated motorcycle racing in the 60s, won 10 world championships and 14 TTs in the Isle of Man. And finally, Prince Charles joined 300 people in prayers this afternoon for the 13 black youths who died in the Deptford fire. He was visiting Deptford to open a new community centre for local youngsters just 200 yards away from the scene of the house fire. Well, that's all from me. News Night tonight is at 10:55. Now a look at the weather.